alphabet sounds of all kinds. Put them together and you can spell words. You can make any word you've ever heard. You can use letters that have sounds. Letters, they make words. Letters, they spell.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to Tuesdays at 2, Rich Learning Live with our special guest, Liz Rutledge, who's going to talk to us today a little bit about mindfulness and memory, and we're even going to geek out on the neurology of mindfulness. Liz, welcome. Who are you and where are you and what are you doing?
Well, my name is Liz Rutledge. I'm in Denver, Colorado. And who am I? Well, let's see. I'm a mother of 3. I'm a wife. I'm a business partner. And I am very deeply passionate about the environment and mindfulness, and especially mindfulness for young children. And I say that my superpower is that I can get a room full of people to meditate without it being woo-woo or weird. And have gotten feedback. People experience like their body relaxing for the first time ever.
Let's start with some definitions. What is mindfulness?
So when I was about 10, very stressful time in my life as a young child, and I woke up one morning and I felt like I was having a heart attack. I felt like this huge weight on my chest. And I went to my dad, and I think I might have even grabbed his car keys and said, "Dad, you need to drive me to the hospital because I think I'm having a heart attack." And he brought me back inside and he had me lay down on my bed and he had me watch my belly rise and fall while I breathed. And he helped me calm down. And that's the first time I remember experiencing mindfulness. But my mother also taught me how to see pain in a different light. And she taught me how to imagine pain like an ice cube melting using breath work. She and my dad had done Lamaze training, and if you know about Lamaze and how they use breath to navigate pain, I've also birthed all 3 of my children without any drugs. And so I feel like those are 2 little pieces to help lead into the definition of mindfulness. Now, mindfulness is basically just being present in any moment without judgment. So it's finding that now. And now it's gone, right? So finding now over and over and over again. And it doesn't have to be breathing, but it does help us take that stimulus. And instead of if we're in traffic and somebody cuts us off, fingers start coming out, words start coming out, hands go to horns without mindfulness. But with mindfulness, the more we practice finding that now, finding right this moment, and it's fleeting, right? Because we're usually either dwelling on the past or worrying about the future, right? Depression can be because of focusing on the things that happened in the past, and anxiety is usually worrying about the future. But the more we can find now, that stimulus leads to pause, to a mindful response, and we can make a choice, right? So if we're in traffic, we can put on some music. Like I was driving this morning with Yuval's music, his 40 hertz music, and keeping me super chill while I was driving for 30 minutes on the interstate, which I don't do much anymore. And that kind of thing we can do to keep ourselves calm, but also the judgment piece and going like, okay, that person just cut me off, but they must have something going on that's way more stressful than what I'm dealing with right now. So I should just let them go ahead of me, right? In traffic, just let them go, because maybe they're rushing to the hospital. Maybe if they're late for their job today, they're going to be fired, and they're a single mom of 3, and that's, or 5, or who knows, and that's going to affect their life deeply. So
Or maybe they're just a jerk and too bad for them. I feel so sorry.
Yeah, right. But just starting to remove that judgment and realizing that we're all human and we're all in this together and we're all going through stuff, right? And so I can get into the neuroscience now if you want, or
let's geek out. I do have one thought, and when an animal is injured, they don't go screaming around and usually they just pause and shut down.
Or shake. right? Sometimes they shake to shake it off.
Seems like you slam your hand with a hammer or something like that. If you shake too much blood flow, and you're just going to make it worse. So I've tried to train myself that when the moment of pain or you hit your knee, I just take a deep breath and say, okay, okay. And yep, that's pain. Um,
We can
yeah.
breathe.
So I like the steps in between, but it might take a little training, and maybe the younger the better. So yeah,
Yeah,
take it away.
the younger the better. And yeah, I was taught this technique when I was young, but I'm not saying I'm still working on it, right? Like I still occasionally lose my temper, raise my voice. Like I'm not proud of it, but it does happen occasionally, but not as often as it used to. And I do feel like one of my secrets personally is every day, like the way you brush your teeth. Every morning I get up, I take care, bio break, and then meditate. And then usually I'll have some coffee or tea and have a little time for reflection. But like it's literally like the brushing the teeth. Like I have to do it every day now because on the days I slip and don't, I'm not as balanced, I'm not as calm. And so the more we do it, the more we are able to stop, drop, and breathe is what I like to say. Like if you hit your thumb with a hammer, instead of yelling, throwing something, you can stop, drop, and breathe, right?
All right. You've been geeking out on the science and the neurology of this now for a little while. Teach us something about the neurology of mindfulness.
Okay, well, I don't usually like to go deep, and then we don't have a lot of time today, so I'm not going to get into all the many studies that have studied the benefits of mindfulness, but they have found that there's a decrease in literally not only those physical symptoms where we can manage the pain, but we can actually not feel as anxious, not feel as depressed, but it takes time and practice, right? We can increase our ability to relax, right? So my nervous system naturally runs high, my genetic makeup naturally runs negative, as many people in the world do. Then we lead to judgment, then that leads to judgment. But if we can practice mindfulness more often, we can tap into relaxation more quickly. As I mentioned, we can reduce the unpleasantness of pain. And I'm not saying things don't hurt, but it cannot be quite as scary, traumatizing, upsetting if we can breathe through it. We ultimately have more vitality, and I'll get into that a little bit later. And we feel better about ourselves the less we're judging others. And I always like to say, when we're pointing our fingers at somebody, there's three pointing back at us. So if we're saying, you're a jerk, well, what's going on inside of us, right? So we can feel better about ourselves because whenever we're criticizing somebody, we're kind of holding up a mirror in a lot of ways. And we can also cope with stress more effectively. So we can go, God, that really pissed me off. But instead of yelling at the person, we can go, that's not okay. That's what I worked on teaching my kids, especially to deal with like bullies or mean girls, Hey, that's not okay. Three magic words that can just stop that kind of behavior in its tracks. And it also emboldens us and empowers us. And then, like I was saying, reducing anxiety and those sorts of things. So they did this study back in 2012 where they studied students and they measured some really fascinating things in the brain, which is what we're talking about today, right? The neurology and neuroscience of mindfulness. So what they ultimately, and you don't have to read this whole busy slide, but they ended up measuring an improved axonal density and myelin sheath of the nerves, and some really fascinating things like increase in white matter. So that was really, really cool to learn about, but that was 12 years ago. And now they're finding all sorts of really cool stuff. But in that experiment, they studied two groups, right? And with one group, they had them meditate for 5 days with meditation training, and the other ones just chilled out with a book or calming music, right? But the meditation piece ended up leading to some interesting results. So before and after the training, they had these groups take these math tests. And I personally ended up developing a story in my mind when I was in, I think, seventh grade, which, by the way, is the hardest grade for, I think, all human beings, because that's when we go from being children on our way to being adults, and it's that year when our hormones kick in, and so we literally feel like our brain is detached from our body sometimes, I think. And in seventh grade, I was put in an advanced math class, and I did not do well in that math class. And my mom always used to say, I'm so proud of you because you rose to the occasion. And I was like, in my head, but I was like, but I was getting C's, D's, and F's, and that didn't feel good. So I thought I was bad at math. So I had a story in my head that I was bad at math, and I have ever since. Anyone else like me start talking about numbers and my brain goes, please don't make me divide anything by anything. And what they found was that experimental group that was doing the mindfulness meditation, they performed better. And I think the reason is because they were less stressed, and they just overall were more calm, more focused on the problem solving element, right? So the results of this experiment were, like I said, less anxiety, depression, anger, fatigue, like those benefits that I covered earlier, but also they were less aggressive. They were able to resolve conflicts better. I think they did this experiment for over the course of a month ultimately. They were more alert, they were more focused, and they had a decrease in this stress hormone that a lot of us are talking about now called cortisol. And they showed an improvement brain health. So I just want to turn off the slides for a second and talk about my personal experience. So in 2014, our oldest daughter, who's now 23, was 12 years old, and she had a friend whose older brother took his own life at the age of 14. And I went to the school counselor at the middle school and I said, how is this possible? How does somebody that age know how to do this? And how can I help? Right? Like, this is unacceptable to me. And I think it was because I had grown up with all this mindfulness training, informal mindfulness training. And I was like, how do not all kids know this? Like, how to calm their nervous system, how to, realize like what's the worst that can happen, and they will get past this situation. And I ended up, the long story short is that I ended up getting mindful schools trained, and I ran mindfulness at this middle school for several years and had great results because it was volunteer based, and we went from having sort of one student to 73 one day where the kids were just coming. And that was at the middle school level. And then, it's been a minute, and I was observing and going like, oh shoot, we need to go younger. So then I went to our youngest's elementary school, and I said, hey, I'm doing this at the middle school. How about if I start doing it at the elementary school? So I did this voluntarily for, I think, 7 years and have been teaching mindfulness. I'm coming up on my 8th year. So I've had a whole class of kids go through the programming that I now teach. I go into the classroom, I also do videos, and I'm observing less bullying, less pushing in the halls. And what I really want to find out this year is if they've seen a measurable improvement in the test scores. But the classrooms, from my personal observation, definitely calmer. Kids are paying attention better, definitely more focused, and like I said, less bullying. And the principal I just met with him so that we could talk about starting again this coming fall. And he said it was almost eerily calm this last year. Like it's noticeable. So these are elementary school kids. So imagine what would happen if we started even younger, right? Because the brain does a lot of formation between 0 and 3, but then a lot before 25, and the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until 25, right? And so let's catch them even earlier. Let's catch them even younger. Let's get them knowing that they are strong and confident in themselves. Let's get them not building up these stories like, I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or for girls especially, I have to be perfect, right? Through my perfectionism, like we have to get over those stories so that we can solve a lot of the world's problems, right? So just getting back to the neuroscience a little bit. So with that experiment about this, so after about 11 hours of this mindfulness-based meditation, they found they could measure that, like I was saying, the myelin sheath thickened, the axon density thickened, and it helped, cells were healthier in general. And what I've recently started to really geek out on are telomeres, right? Telomeres they cap the chromosomes. And a degradation in telomeres is where we experience degradation in our mental and physical health. And it's an indication of the shorter our telomeres get, the older we get. Basically, it's an indication of aging, and it can affect all kinds of things. And I'd like to stop sharing again because I just would like to share another personal story, which is that my parents are divorced, as I mentioned, and remarried, wonderful people. And they're very happy with their partners, their newer partners that they've been with for 40 years. But my stepfather in 2018, he's always been forgetful. So I think it took us a while to realize that there was something else going on. But my stepfather was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment in 2018. And that's scary for anyone, right? Turns out he's got the genetic markers from both biological parents for Alzheimer's. But his degradation has been very slow because he early on saw, thanks to a lot in my mother, due to my mother's pushing, saw a functional medicine doctor. So medical doctor who's taken the latest neuroscience and applied it. And so he ended up doing all kinds of blood tests and figuring all these things out. And he did protocols to remove the metals from his body, to remove the mold from his body, and started exercising, eating differently, reducing inflammatory foods. I said exercise. He does a vagus nerve stimulation with the TENS unit, and he is supposed to be doing meditation, but he hates meditating. So what does he do? He gardens. And that's where I just like to say, for those of you watching this who are like, I can't meditate, meditation's not for me. Well, we'll see, because we're going to do a little demonstration today. But it doesn't have to be sitting and breathing. It can be gardening. It can be walking and observing nature. It can be, there's a Calm app that has these sleep stories, and that can bring about calm. And it can be Tai Chi. It can be all kinds of things. It doesn't have to be sitting and breathing. So are you guys with me?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Telomeres are super amazing elements of our bodies, and they shorten with age, as I mentioned, and they can serve as an early predictor of many diseases beyond that early onset, Alzheimer's, dementia. It can also affect our cancer, type 2 diabetes, all kinds of things. And I think it's important to mention this because there are things that we can do to improve our telomeres. But this advancing age with the shrinking telomeres is one of the biggest risks for cancer and all these things. And so that's kind of scary.
This is a pretty exciting field, especially if you can postpone their deterioration with things like mindfulness and exercise and such. So it's very positive to think that we can extend the years of our life and the life of our years, especially if there are practical things like you're teaching us.
Yeah, well, and in the case of my stepfather, he was diagnosed in 2018, and a good friend of mine, her father was also diagnosed a year before then. And her father's doing what the medical doctors are saying, take a pill, and they've had to take away his keys. He's left the house and decided he was just going to walk to downtown Denver, about 30 minutes walk. He does not know his grandchildren's names anymore. And some days, and my friend goes and sees him every Thursday, and some weeks he doesn't know her name or who she is or what the relationship is. And there's no judgment there. It's just a choice. They chose one way and he chose another. And I don't know if it's the same, there's different levels of the cognitive impairment. But it's notable that my stepdad, actually my mom and sister and stepdad and I are all going to travel in Wales next week. And he's able to do that. and he can still drive, and he goes to pickleball. He goes and plays pickleball with the people down the street. And like I said, he gardens, and he still has a rich life. And yeah, he forgets to turn off the hose and floods the backyard sometimes, so we have to, make sure somebody's checking on him and making sure he's taking his supplements and things. But like the meditation piece is only one element of it. So I would just caveat everything I'm saying. Like, it's not like you can just sit and breathe and all this other stuff just magically goes away.
Right.
Because you also still have to take care of your physical body in other ways. But it is amazing the things, even just as early as last fall, that they're coming out with, as far as how they're able to now measure increases in those telomeres in mice, for example. And just if you just want to go a little deeper, look for an interview with Dr. Joe Dispenza. Mind-blowing stuff that's going on, that they're realizing, like your blood changes when you're doing meditation. And I would just note that one of the things that Dr. Joe Dispenza said in the interview that I watched is that it doesn't have to be an hour a day. It can be a minute a day, and it could just literally be focusing on the area of your heart and taking slow, deep breaths in for a minute, but every day. And then you should notice a difference over time. And I personally love the gamification of the mindfulness meditation apps, like Insight Timer, Calm. You can keep a streak going, and it's super validating, and there's community in there, so you have that sense of connection. So I'd highly encourage, just explore and figure out what works for you, right? And I think we're getting close on time, so I just want to go through some of the things that we can do to strengthen our telomeres, reduce our anxiety and depression. And I'm not saying that every day is going to be amazing and you're always going to feel great. But one thing I would say, in addition to this list, is catch yourself in a negative thought pattern and see if you can't shift to whatever the opposite of that is. So if I'm sick, like I was sick with, I don't know, it's kind of felt like COVID again. A couple weeks ago, I had some kind of weird virus. And what I say to myself is, I'm so thankful for my health and healing. While I'm taking vitamins, drinking lots of fluids, doing sinus rinses and all the things, I'm physically taking care of my body, but I'm mentally going, I'm not going to let this beat me, and I want to heal quickly, right? So they've all and Dr. Joe Dispenza is a walking example. Serena, my business partner, is a walking example of incredible healing. But what can you do? So what you can do, you can listen to 40 hertz music. So just literally search that on YouTube and you'll find all kinds of stuff. But there's also Yuval's music.
Yeah, YuvalRonMusic.com is doing the work with MIT on 40 hertz, and he would be a great resource.
It's incredible what they've been able to measure. So with that 40 hertz, that frequency stimulates, I think it's our pituitary gland that affects mood, and also our pituitary gland is in touch, it keeps us in touch with our intuition. So how many of you, when you were in school and you were young and the class was acting up, I'm a child of the 70s, so this happened all the time. Put your heads down on the desk, right? My teacher, especially my third grade teacher, was a genius, because she would do that and she'd turn off the lights. So she removed the light stimulus. She had us put our heads down on our desks, and that turns your pituitary gland 90 degrees. That creates a calming sensation. It calms the nervous system right down. So if you're ever feeling overwhelmed, in addition to the slow, deep breath, you can put your head down. That's why yoga is so amazing. Downward dog, child's pose, any of those things that get the heart above the head and turn that pituitary gland 90 degrees. And then the music, the frequencies, amazing. EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and EMDR, right? So you can do this, butterfly hug and tap. And so you can be listening to that music and then just alternating. Anything that causes stimulation on either side of the body is going to balance your energies and bring about calm. EFT tapping, if you're not familiar with that, it's emotional freedom technique tapping. It's now used widely. Both EMDR and EFT tapping have been used by the military to support people with PTSD in all kinds of ways. But with EFT tapping, to my point of like flipping the script, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to do this. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling overwhelmed. And acknowledging, right? I feel overwhelmed. You're going to tap. And then you can do here, 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 here. There's collarbone, sternum. And then once you've acknowledged how you're feeling, you go back through. I'm willing to release this feeling. I'm willing to release overwhelm. I'm willing to release overwhelm. It's super magical. I'm working on getting certified in that at the moment. And then mindfulness meditation. So I'd love to run you through short mindfulness meditation practice, if that's appropriate.
Absolutely. I just looked up the EMDR: eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Reprocessing.
Yeah.
I don't know why I couldn't remember the R. Sorry, thank you, Dr. Rich.
It's basically a reboot. Shut it off, reboot where you want to be.
So I'm about to play my singing bowl, and that's a picture of it there. And I just would love for you all to make sure both feet are flat on the floor so that you feel safe and secure. So if your legs are crossed, please uncross your legs. And then if you're fidgeting or touching anything, just put everything, phone down, put the phone down, put the pens down, whatever you've got in your hands for your hands. And then I'd like to invite you to either put a hand on your chest and a hand on your belly, or both hands on your chest up here, or both hands on your belly, so that you can feel your breath. And then I'd like to invite you to close your eyes. And if you're not comfortable closing your eyes, that's totally fine. You can look down with your eyes relaxed enough to blink. And then let's take 3 slow, deep breaths in through your nose and blow out through your mouth. So breathing in, 2, 3, 4, and blow it out, 4, 3, 2, 1, and in, 2, 3, 4, 5, and blow it out, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and in, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and blow it out, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then closing your lips, staying relaxed. Relax your shoulders. Unhinge your jaw and relax your jaw. And just like a snow globe, if you shake it up and set it down, as you feel the rise and fall of your breath, imagine that snow settling to the bottom, and keep breathing at your own pace. And as you're ready, open your eyes and come back to the room you're in and notice if you feel different.
Why do we tend more toward the negative self-talk than the positive? Why is that a human trait? Would people live longer if they were afraid of things and ran away?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the cave, as they say, the caveman days, although I'm pretty sure there were cave women too. Back in the Stone Age, right? They needed to be in tune and listen for the a rustling of leaves could be a bear or saber-toothed tiger or woolly mammoth about to come and eat you or run you over. So we are wired for fear. I think we're wired to be cautious. We're wired to not trust necessarily. And then when you fast forward, ultimately, there are people that have experienced abuse and abuse from loved ones, abuse from parents, abuse from partners. And it's hard to rebuild trust, and it's hard to not have the first reaction be like a brainstem, like amygdala, right? Amygdala response, right? So that reptilian brain is always on in protection mode. And that's why we want to build that prefrontal cortex and practice calm, and also maybe take, a self-defense class so that if something happens.
We have a question from Ken from London in the chat. He says, I'm involved in a UK charity that helps addicts. Long story, but one common factor in all addicts passing through this charity, 1,400 to date, is negativity. You're not good enough. You'll never be good enough, etc. How destructive simple comments can be. And maybe it's not the whole cause of addictions, but maybe when we're so down on ourselves, we try to deaden the pain or escape the pain or find some way out of it. From Gwen, she says, I'm at an airport and appreciate changing through Liz's meditation. It was stressful getting ready for the big trip. Well, Gwen, we hope you have a very relaxing trip. And if someone's nervous near you, tell them to breathe in through their nose, breathe out. Okay. Jonathan McClellan, who, by the way, will be the next poet laureate of the United States one day. How would one sustain the effects of mindfulness without or absent of external stimuli?
I just traveled in Europe with my 18-year-old daughter for 2 weeks.
Okay.
And like I said, I have to meditate every morning. And one morning I was like, shoot, I didn't meditate. And we were on a moving train. Actually, we might have been in a moving car, I'm not sure. And I just put my AirPods in. They have that noise canceling feature now. And I started my app so I get credit. I keep my streak. And I just closed my eyes and just breathed right then. So I think if you're on the subway, if you're on an airplane, if you're in a dentist chair, if I'm understanding the question correctly, yeah. And I mean, that's how they're now teaching this in the military. And I just was on an interview with a former Marine, and he said they weren't calling it back then, but when he had to, he was a sniper, I think, or something, and he had to really calm down his mind and body to be able to do his job. And he was practicing that, and who knows what the environment was and what he was dealing with in that moment. Was that your question, Jonathan? Am I getting that right?
In my own personal life, I rely on stimulus to get to a point of mindfulness. I practice walking meditation, the motion, the music that I'm constantly playing in the background. I rely on stimulus, but sometimes that intentional positive stimulus isn't accessible to me if I'm caught in a moment. If you're caught, like, you're someone's cutting you off, you can't just like quickly turn to your radio station on. How do you train your brain to be sitting in that space of peace and calmness and serenity without it being forced, but it becoming nature or secondhand nature to you? How do you train your brain to do that?
Well, I can tell you what a fifth grader told me. She said, as a fifth grader, she would have been seeing me come in since kindergarten. She was like, I can't meditate. None of this works for me. And then there was one day when I went in with this technique, and this is, I think, will answer your question, and I think this will be helpful, but maybe not. It was an exercise that we were doing. And by the way, every week is different with the kids because I never know what's going to stick. So I throw spaghetti and I see what sticks. So this piece of spaghetti stuck with this one girl. She said, when you coached me on breathing in and breathing out and thinking, I'm breathing in as you breathe in, I'm breathing out as you breathe out. That's it. I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. No headphones needed, no app needed, no music needed, no walking meditation needed. You just fill your brain. The only thing it can focus on is the rise and fall of your chest, the lungs filling and expelling, and I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out.
Perfect.
That answer your question?
Perfectly.
Yay!
Perfectly. I think it's a good reminder to us that we can serve as our own guardians of our temples, you know, and I think, you know, being intentional about invoking the effects of mindfulness-based mental health care is important.
For sure. And I have another one that I just want to share. So I've had a lot of stuff happen in my life, and I was in a scuba accident in 2019. And now, when I have anything on my face like that, like a mouthpiece kind of thing, in the dental chair, my stepdad is a retired dentist, never had this problem before the scuba accident. I was skiing one day. We live in Colorado. So I was skiing out of the blue, out of nowhere. I was wearing a balaclava that was too tight. I started having a panic attack on the mountain and I had to stop, pull the balaclava off. And what I figured out in that moment is one way to navigate a panic attack as it's happening is to blow out all your air. In a moment of panic, or maybe in a moment when you have to have a hard conversation with somebody, if you blow out all your air, the only thing left is a slow, deep breath in. And then your brain, your mind is telling your body, you're safe, all is well. And you might even think that, I am safe, all is well. Instead of I'm breathing in, I am safe, all is well, right? And or find your own thing. And then the other thing I would just mention is I'm sure you've all heard about 478 or 479 breathing, but that's another technique they teach like Navy SEALs. And it can also help just regulate the nervous system. So breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 7 counts, breathe out for 8 counts, repeat until you're better.
I know that breathing in through the nose, inside your nasal cavities, if you cut a shell in half, you'll see kind of what the nasal cavity is. And you have almost a fist size amount of nasal cavities that can absorb, so aside from filtering the air that's going to go to your lungs, it absorbs so much more. So I know there's a health piece with that. What's the health piece of just getting rid of every last ounce of air before you breathe in again? Is there something to be said about completely emptying?
Well, I mean, my favorite yoga teacher used to say, you're blowing out the toxic air. You're just, and you can even imagine it as like a putrid green color, just like blowing out, you know, because the stress lives in our body. So getting rid of that toxic.
Yeah. Do you have a slide on something you're doing real soon that you could show us that might be fun for everybody?
I do. Well, I'd love to share that, you know, my big passion is teaching mindfulness to children. They're so receptive. And my business partner, Dr. Serena Bullard, and I have a program for young children ages 3 to 6 called Lessons from the Bright Butterfly. And we have it in 2 schools, entering our 3rd year with those schools with great results. So I would love to just share that. So on Experience Mindfulness that talks about the science of mindfulness as well as just like beginner basics of different breathing patterns and when they're useful. So if you have your phone handy and you want to scan the QR code, otherwise you can just go to our website, which is sustainablehappiness.together.com, and go to online learning and see all of our online classes, but you can also see our class for young children, our class for schools and organizations. We're partnering with the Girl Scouts, and we even have like a fun patch that Girl Scout troops can get if they complete the lessons from the Bright Butterfly. And what that does is teaches the social and emotional learning skills that we teach with the life cycle of the butterfly. And so it dovetails really well with existing school curricula. It's really easy to implement because we're doing short videos that lead to activities that connect people. So
that is beautiful. And it's the Sustainable Happiness Together with Liz Rutledge. We're going to see Serena later on in August. Next week, we're with Dr. Tony Simmons from the High School of Recording Arts and Dr. Bill Nelson talking about performance arts at the core of what we learn, not at the sideline. Thank you, Liz.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful.
Okay.
I